in this moment. Of course, how to run this notebook, the basic setup, and you can pick the month you want to look at. Now, you may not actually, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to look at October because we haven't even gotten to that part of the year, or January because shouldn't expect to see any changes due to COVID during January. But March and April are really the ones we're focusing on now. We have a good sense of the data from April already at this point in June. Like, if facilities were to have reported their water pollution to the EPA for the month of April, it should be in now. So we're really focusing on those 2 months. And we're asking questions about both air pollution and water pollution. And within each of those, both monitoring and actual emissions or discharges. So the notebook is structured around these different questions. And we start with air. We ask, are these facilities even monitoring air emissions right now? Are they doing the stack tests that they are asked to keep track of what they're emitting? And well, we're not going to go through all the results. That's what we're going to do in the breakout groups. But so we chart those. We ask, we look at, whether they actually should have been conducting the stack tests. We map it out. We look at inspections. So state and federal agencies conduct inspections of facilities to ensure compliance with the law, environmental law. So we look at it as well. So it's not just a question of our facilities complying, but our agencies actually fulfilling their duty to look out at facilities. And of course, actual emissions. What during the pandemic are we seeing released into the air? So we chart that. And particularly we chart violations of permitted levels of air pollutants and what those pollutants are. And of course, we map them. And a really important thing here is getting a sense of, what kind of facilities are doing this? Is it, are these like, you could think of the facilities as good actors and bad actors. It's actually maybe not useful to think about it in that way, but we can track, like, because the EPA has said, we're not going to take any enforcement actions against those who violate their permits during COVID. That has real implications because we might be seeing a lot of facilities that are like habitually exceeding their permits to be doing it during the pandemic and getting essentially a free pass to pollute. So then we move into water and we look at, okay, well, same thing. Are facilities exceeding their permit levels for water pollution? And it's important to keep in mind that, like, these are permits to pollute. So we're looking at whether they've exceeded those permits, but of course, even if they've met the permit, they're still might be emitting, discharging water pollutants into rivers and streams. We look at what those pollutants are, map it out, do the same thing. Are these facilities that are exceeding their permits, like, typically doing that in the past, not just now? And we also look at, the Clean Water Act is really much better than the Clean Air Act in terms of reporting requirements. It's a more automated digital system. So the information there is maybe of a bit higher quality. So we can actually ask and maybe answer in a better way, are facilities doing the monitoring? And so we look at non-compliance due to not submitting reports. And we chart that out. And finally, EPA has said it isn't just giving a blanket waiver to facilities during this period. One of the things that they've enabled is for facilities to say, hey, we couldn't make this report on our water pollution or air pollution, water pollution in particular, because of COVID. And so that's something that's in our ECHO database that we can look at. So we can look at what facilities have indicated that because of COVID, they couldn't actually submit their reports. So this might be a good sort of jumping point for storytelling group to look at, well, what are those facilities that are saying that for COVID reasons they can't submit, their water quality monitoring, and so we look and map that. So that is the kind of structure of the notebook, and again, it's really water and air and looking at emissions and reporting requirements, and to get a handle on the patterns in both. And so that's the data science track of things, right? We have that information. Now we need to try to make sense of it and to turn it into compelling visuals and stories, and to contextualize what's going on. And so that we want to break out into these 3 different tracks to start to parse through this. And so let me pull this up. So if you go back to the meeting notes, we've got to sign up for different breakout rooms. So please do sign yourself up into one of those. And in fact, we're pretty much already, the facilitators will be in those. So, but maybe before we break out into those rooms, we could just have a conversation about what we just saw in the notebook and any sort of clarifying questions. And I will be bouncing back and forth between the different breakout groups. I will try to, at least. You might have to sign into the Edge account to do that, but to help answer any questions.
That sounds good, Eric. I mean, I'm looking through it, it seems like there's some key findings that it would be nice just to make some bold graphics around, like, this enormous drop in stack tests, the big rise in the number of Clean Water Act. My sense is that's missing reports, right? So how many more missing reports there are, and doing that for both months could be really helpful. And also that drop in inspections, those seem like 3 key findings that we're going to want to communicate in social media.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, in terms of concrete tasks we can be working on in different tracks, bringing together the March and April data. Currently, the notebook spits out both. We might want to actually merge those to say, over the first 2 months of EPA's policy, in really the first 2 months of shutdown in the US due to the pandemic, what have we seen? So combining those would be helpful. Yeah, and updating the charts that are in the draft that I just showed would also be very helpful.
Other ideas from folks in research? Meg and I were just talking about, we're going to be looking at what a stack test is, what refineries normally emit. We thought about the intersection between what refineries normally emit and gases that make comorbidities for COVID worse. And then we were going to we pulled out a map of where refineries are, and we were going to try and overlap and just specifically look at refineries and try and come up with some case studies for particular refineries that are located in EJ areas, sort of trying to make that double argument. So storytelling, that's also something that you all could try, is kind of going through that map of where the non-enforcement or, where non-reporting is happening for stack tests, and then seeing if you can identify a couple of pretty bad refineries that are in EJ areas, for instance.
So just we're sort of focusing, it's also a little bit more research and contextualization on the storytelling side.
Yeah, I think so, because I'm not really clear. I mean, does anybody have any other really good ideas for what storytelling could do?
I mean, we could generate more questions, but I feel like we have enough questions to conduct a pretty good inquiry. And if it would be more useful for us to do that piece, I think that's totally great.
Well, maybe we should have a breakout with research and storytelling together, kind of then.
Yeah.
And one half can be looking for these case studies of refineries, and the other half can be providing more information on stack tests and chemicals.
Yeah, and I think in general for storytelling, it would be, if it's location specific, then it would be, do you have any stories about your experiences with COVID and living near a facility? But, you know, just a meta comment.
Yeah, and it might be that you can look up things like we found one, Megan found one outside of Galveston that hasn't been reporting, and so it might be nice to like look up the EJ group from there.
Yeah.
Those kinds of next steps.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, and so do we have some clarity who's going into data viz?
Lourdes and I think.
I will also jump into data viz, but I will technically, I might need to log into Edgy to bounce between the breakout rooms, but I'll also keep Slack open. So if there are particular questions that come up as the other working group is working, message me through Slack.
Okay, so I'm just going to make breakout rooms quickly. Go ahead, Megan.
I just had a quick question, Eric, sorry. Just sort of going through the notebook, I'm worried about if someone runs this notebook that doesn't necessarily have a lot of context, the assumption that a lack of a stack test or a lack of reporting indicates non-compliance. And we know those are like two separate issues. So I'm just wondering what people's thoughts are on that, or if we think it's fine.
That's a great question. So my own thoughts are several. So in some cases, a lack of testing is non-compliance. Like you are required under certain programs to have tested or reported, and if you don't, you're in non-compliance. And in terms of adding more context, yes, I think that's a great thing that research and contextualization could do, maybe not right now, but help us put more context into the actual notebook. That might be something that comes out of working on the draft report. And the other thing is that, yeah, I mean, there are ways to kind of, yeah, I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
Yeah, have the breakout rooms ready. I'll move us all there unless there's any more questions before we do that. All right, and open all the rooms. And so should we come back at 1:50?
Yeah, let's come back at 1:50 and just check in on what we've done.
Okay.
Okay, I think I might have found more. I'm gonna put this link in the chat. I just found the air pollutant report, and it actually reports the exact amount of emissions.
Awesome. I'm just going to go through and read what others have written. So stack tests aren't actually necessarily run in the stack.
This is fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, so welcome back, everybody. I'm super impressed with what we were able to accomplish in like less than half an hour in the DataViz team. And we had fun doing it. So yeah, curious to hear, well, we'll get a report from the DataViz team in just a second. Do we actually want to hear from research, contextualization, and storytelling first? We got a presentation. Somebody want to share that with us? Share the screen?
Yeah, Megan, you want to walk us through?
Sure, I can do that.
Wow, you have a lot of slides.
Yeah,
That's
so we sort of
awesome.
just threw info in here. So let's see. We were curious and sort of learning more about stack tests, specifically from refineries in relation to COVID and non-compliance, and then also what actually refineries might be emitting and how that's related to COVID. So first we just sort of ran the opening part of the notebook to see how stack tests have been decreasing in April and May. You can see there's a pretty drastic decrease from other months. Here's April on the left and May on the right. And then we wanted to look a little more into what actually a stack test is to make sure our assumptions about them were correct. And Leslie sort of looked into that. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Leslie?
Yeah, it's, where did I put that? Yeah, so pretty much what I found out is that it's a procedure to measure air pollutants. And so it's from a stack. I'm not exactly sure how to explain it, but pretty much I found that once the stack test occurs, they take various samples, and once they take the sample from the stack, they analyze it in the lab. What I found that was interesting was that it says that compliance test is another word for stack test, and it says that they are required to be conducted when the production process is at 95 or greater of its rated capacity. Need to recheck that because I realized that the document I looked at was from 1998. But I found an updated version. And so it says here that it usually consists of 3 runs, and each run is typically around 60 minutes long. Yeah, that's pretty much what I found out. I intend to look further into that.
That 95% number is interesting.
Yeah,
because if nothing's running at capacity, then they wouldn't be required to do it legally.
Right, which might explain the observed just really low number of tests of inspections by district. Like when we were looking at the Louisiana District 2, they were most years didn't have any clean air inspections. But I guess an inspection is different than a compliance test.
So the way that I would read
Yes.
it is that when you are scheduled to submit a stack test, that you have to ramp up to 95% of capacity, rather than like if you are operating at 95%, you have to conduct a stack test. But I don't know. That's a really interesting.
That would be so ironic. In order for us to test your emissions, you have to pollute the maximum amount that you.
Well, could that be a loophole? Like, could that be a way that emitters just don't have to get tested? Because they say you emit at 94% of capacity, then you're not hitting that threshold and you never have to test.
Yeah, I can imagine someone be like, okay, let's keep it 94%, 9.9.
It is truly staggering, that next map
I
of
think there's actually
all the places that haven't had a stack test since 2001. And we were a bit confused about that one, Eric, as to how to use it to look for COVID non-compliance.
Yeah, it's a tough one because, unlike the Clean Water Act, as I understand it, for the Clean Air Act, the reporting requirements are different. There's no automatic reporting system. And so it's hard to say that like a facility didn't submit its numbers because it's not necessarily required to every month like they are with the Clean Water Act. So what we did there was just to show, well, over the past 20 years, how often do these stack tests occur? And it turns out that it's very infrequent. But I don't, the connection to COVID is tough, other than to say that like, there are a lot of facilities that probably should have stack tested, in the past couple months because they haven't been stack tested in forever.
okay, I know we don't have so much time left, so try to click through this. And then we were just interested in seeing what refineries normally emit and comparing that to the pie chart that the notebook makes with the most commonly exceeded pollutants since COVID. And basically the answer is pretty much every criteria air pollutant refineries are responsible for emitting. And then the like sort of a specific one that refineries are one of the only places that emit are benzene, and that's a really problematic carcinogenic chemical that are found in really high levels around refineries. And then we sort of focused in on a few, and Casey and Sarah sort of worked on this facility outside of Galveston, Texas in Sweeney, looking at EJ and their non-compliance. So this is the facility.
Yeah, so what I found here is that they're at, that the area around this facility is at 80 to 90%. They're low income, 80 to 90%. And Megan mentioned something about how if to score into this in low income category, you have to be in extreme poverty.
Yeah, so just using the screen mapper, you have to make less than half of the federal low poverty threshold, which is pretty extreme in my opinion.
But it's not that 80 to 90% of the population
Percentile.
Right, they're in the like percentile of the country, right? Yeah.
That would be a good thing to like pass this off to DataViz and say, okay, can you make a new legend that has the actual range based on the like half the
I think that took us through to basically where we got to.
Yeah, I will stop sharing.
Cool, this is so wonderful. There's a lot of questions that came out of this, some specific to the notebook, so yeah, ping me on that. But also just generally like understanding the patterns of enforcement and compliance and emissions during COVID. So we are at 2, but I do want to have, if we could just go a few minutes over so that we can hear from the DataViz group. Lourdes has shared the slides. Do you want to present them? And by slides, I mean, there are 2 slides.
Lourdes,
You're on mute.
You did look very excited too.
Yeah, we have a color palette, and we decided to combine the March and April of each year for the entire United States for Clean Water Act verified violations versus non-reports. And because Megan, you asked that question, and we were like, oh, hey, that would actually be an interesting question to entertain. And so we have over the years the number of facilities with violations, and then we see, as the years progress, that there's more, generally more missing reports. And then in 2020, we have less violations and then a bigger gap of missing reports. So this is interesting, especially thinking about COVID and maybe there's less violations because no one's really checking up on facilities as much. And it would be good to go further and quantify the difference or percent change between the violations and missing reports. I don't know if Cole and Eric want to add anything to this.
Yeah, no, I think that was a great overview, Lourdes. Yeah, I'm not sure what to add other than this is helpful for seeing like a better picture of what violations could have actually occurred at this time.
And I think it brings up new questions or new ideas for what data science can do, which is calculating that percentage difference, and then that could be passed back off to data viz to represent that.
Mm-hmm.
And in the process, we learned Google Sheets. We used Google Sheets. We used a palette maker. So it was a good learning experience.
Yeah, it also makes me think that like with the whole rollback of like the Waters of the US ruling, how that might have affected the change in verified violations. But that's facility based, not watershed based though, right? So that might not actually have an effect.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Cool. Well, I mean, I thought this was really fun. I think we learned new things about environmental enforcement. I think we learned even new software, right? We learned a little bit about how to use Google Sheets, and we learned about what's going on right now with COVID. And maybe most importantly, we got a sense of what an event could look like. I don't think we'll have like just hour-long events, probably be a bit longer, but hopefully this is giving you a sense of one way that events might work and the kinds of questions and products and ideas that they would generate. So thank you all so much for helping me kind of take a closer look at this COVID stuff. And I do think that we want to put it all together and get it past the finish line shortly. So I will be asking you all to jump in and help take a look at the report that we're writing.
Great.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Great.
All right.
Thank you, everyone. Have a
Thank
good
everyone.
weekend.